Next time you hop on a bike or hop in your car or step outside your door front, think about blind spots in a really active and present way, and think about then that as a metaphor for what innovation could be in your life. It's within the hand and the grasp of each of us, and it's very much embodied in that sense that we can feel it and sense it and understand it. And if we can think about that as not just a static thing, but as a constantly changing thing, then I feel as though that opportunity for innovation, the aha, the new sight, that is more possible and more possible within a more immediate future. It doesn't have to wait for 30 years.
Well, Cecilia, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast to chat with me today.
Thank you, Emily. It's such a delight to be here.
I was hoping I get everyone to do this, just a little bit of an introduction for those who don't know you. So your name, your title, the organization you work for, and of course, more importantly, one or two things that you are passionate about.
Sure. My name is Cecilia Warren. I'm an independent director on the board of iMOVE Australia, which is a national research translation company. So really driving research between government, academia, and industry, including startups. And I would say that my journey into transport has really taken the scenic route. So I started in government, working in defence and education, health policy, and then moved over to the corporate world, very curious about how does industry or corporates, how do they make things come to life? I know how government does, how does it work on the other side? And working for Insurance Australia Group, I ended up working in a lot of between spaces, so between insurance and government or regulations, working, I found myself in the area of the intersection between compulsory insurances, so motor insurance, and then that led into, well, how do we prevent more accidents from happening? Because too many people are dying, too many people are injured. That took me into road safety, the whole road safety ecosystem. That happened at a time when technology was really taking off, or particularly the hype around autonomous vehicles, or the excitement around what can happen with autonomous vehicles, with connected vehicles. And so that led me into a broader engagement around liability for insurance and autonomous vehicles with the broader ecosystem around innovation, which led then to working with researchers and more formalized collaborations, which took me into iMOVE, and working then in this whole transport innovation ecosystem, really to try and understand the future and what that sort of held. I'm still with iMOVE Australia, and I'm also on the board of advice for the Institute for Transport and Logistic Studies. And what I've discovered over my career is that what I'm really passionate about is the blind spots that can drive innovation. And so continuing on this transport metaphor, the journey, the blind spots, if you think about what happens when you get an aha moment or an insight, or innovation comes, it arises often from something that's within your own sphere, where you've simply taken something from another field, or you've seen something in a different way. And to me, that sort of blind spot, some sight that comes into the blind spot area, is the thing that I'm most passionate about. And research is often a way, or working between research, people who think about things deeply and people who tinker with things with their hands and out in the field. Those sort of collaborations often drive these aha moments. So that's what really gets me excited.
So you've mentioned kind of blind spots in research, which is great because it leads in very nicely to the next question, which is, what do you think is the role of research in driving innovation in the transport and logistics sectors? And is there something that researchers could be doing differently maybe to meet those industry needs? Because I think often the complaint is that research is doing one thing that it doesn't quite match up with industry, or there's this lag effect.
Yeah, it's so interesting. If you think about it, there are somewhere between 8 to 9 million researchers around the world working on any different topic. And there will be even more people who are perhaps casual researchers, or who tinker and do things. So it's not a lot, but it's a huge number compared to what each of us, any one of us, or any group of us knows. And there's a curiosity out there that really can be connected and tapped into in a way that I think research can really drive that. However, it can take, and to the point that you just made, it can take 14 years for research to translate into practice. So we've got this sort of funny thing where there's a potential, but the reality can be harder than it seems. And I think one of the things that drives this is this two speed. You kind of indicated this sort of two different speeds. And I think what happens in my experience working from industry with research and then sitting sort of research side a little bit is that both sides are operating on two speeds, but they're just not in sync. And so research can often be sort of at a fast speed initially, but then moves into a slow speed as it's doing the digging into knowledge and doing the investigations and being very thorough and respectful and curating that knowledge in a really respectful way that works across time. So it starts fast, moves into slow. Industry can be the opposite. It can take a long time to work out. In fact, it often doesn't know what it wants to know. It can take a long time to get caught up in bureaucracy and decision-making, all sorts of things. But then once it tips into an innovation, once it's sort of approved, yes, we want to do this, and it tips into an innovation pipeline, then we're talking 2-week sprints and quarterly reporting. And, I don't want to wait 2 years for the outcome. So there is this real, challenge between the two. I do think that advice, if I was to give any, is always a self-portrait. So take it with a grain of salt. But in my experience, the best thing has been when researchers who are deeply curious about their field and what your problem is, they tend to somehow place themselves in front of you, and a collaboration ends up happening. Not always, because there are also, for me, there are still researchers who I wished I could have done more with. In my experience, it is really the ones who are able to kind of get out of the university into your world, but they're so curious, and you realize these people understand something that I don't understand. And if we can just connect and maybe even allow them to be the deep thinkers and you to sort of, this industry, be the doers, or you to, help with that translation. But I do think that that's a real opportunity for both sides, for researchers being aware of the pace within an organization, both its own two-speed, fast and slow, as well as thinking in that complex way around not just within your own field, but from outside of the field, or even just in a transdisciplinary way that is much more open to how your knowledge could be applied or connected with other fields.
So this is also very relevant because you are also a lecturer on innovation. What do you see as some of the most exciting and emerging technologies or business trends even that could transform transportation and logistics in the next, I don't know, let's say, I was going to say 5 to 10 years, but I feel like it moves faster than that, maybe 3 to 5 years.
Well, the 3 to 5 year is the harder period, because that's when you can't just go into abstraction. You're really talking about things that are present. Look, I have been a long advocate for connected technology on the roads, particularly as a way to create safety. I think that people who are far more qualified to talk about the technology element of things, but I come back to this blind spot thing. If you think about the challenges that we often still accept in transport, we still have 1,200 people die per year. We still have 34,000 injuries per year. We still have people who are living shorter lives because they're living close to polluted highways. We have problems with the environment. We have pollution. We have congestion. We have supply chain issues. Transport is a through line through everybody's life. Whether you are involved technically in transport or not, you are kind of involved. To me, if we were to think about transport not as its own discipline or as a discipline that's primarily made of engineers, but as a field that is ripe for disruption by transdisciplinarity, what I think could happen is that many more of those blind spots could be uncovered, and uncovered within the sphere, within that sort of 3 to 5 year time horizon. Because if you think about what a blind spot is, imagine being in your car, on a bike, even as you walk. Blind spots are not static. They're changing relative to you and the environment. And you can think about, oh no, I've looked there. well, you need to look again because every moment it's changing. That sort of, that opportunity, and I know that there's a lot more happening now in transdisciplinarity and getting not just people, not just a diversity of opinion, but people to actually talk at a level that is beneath opinion and expertise and at the sort of values layer. And so you're starting to say, well, if we want to build a future, what values do we want to see that future, or want to anticipate the future? What are the values that we want, not to bring our blind spots for the present into that, but to actually uncover that. And listening to some of the other guests who've been on this podcast, you've had a couple who have really demonstrated, in my opinion, this blind spot innovation idea. One was talking about friction on the road. So how do you simply put a different material on the road that will do something differently in its engagement with motorcyclists and other people? So increasing friction reduces the number of accidents. It's like genius. Why? It seems so obvious when you look at it, but it is simply taking something we take for granted, road surfaces, and rethinking it. Another one was on driver education. And I just thought, again, here is someone who is working from within their practical knowledge in a field and combining that with knowledge and expertise from academia. And between the two of them, there is some new insight that emerges around how people can use their kind of creative intelligence or their embodied cognition to understand their environment and be more aware, more attentive on the road, and to try and do this thing that we all do and slow down time. And to me, they are examples of what is possible within the broad remit of all of us, anyone who's either directly or tangentially involved in transport. But it's how we use the tools, and it's what thinking we bring, what values we bring, what connection we bring across disciplines that will really drive that change.
I think what you've said really nicely also harks back to another episode with David Tucker, actually, from Infrastructure Australia. And it's something I think I've quoted him a lot in episodes, so I should really find a new quote. But he says that even if you don't think actively about transport or consider yourself a transport engineer or in that side, that everybody at heart is a transport engineer, because everyone has an opinion about how they get from A to B and what they think the best way to do that is, and how all of these different ways on their commute kind of converge together. Because I think if you ask anybody, and if they've had a bad day because their train was late or the way that a bus service was set up, everyone has an opinion. And I think that's really an interesting perspective to be like, well, you actually can contribute because this is something that you actively participate in, even if you don't have like a formal training.
Well, David's spot on. The research says that throughout history, we have, as humans, we have all operated around the same sort of travel budget time. So we've all usually operated on a 60-minute per day on average travel time. Doesn't matter whether you've got technology that can take you faster in that 60 minutes or whether you're walking. It is still this idea that we will all spend roughly an hour a day on travel. And as that extends, other types of research indicate that the further away you live from work, the more commuting time you have to do, the greater the amount of stress that you encounter in your lived experience. And so even then, if you start to think about, well, then what's happening in the headspace of people on the roads, how then is that even that experience kind of stretching or pulling at our humanity? And how can we think about those things from a human and a lived experience perspective? But no, David's 100% right. We are all actively engaged in the domain of transport and we should be, right? That's a really good thing to be, really good perspective to have.
So you mentioned in the introduction, you mentioned that you were also on the board of advice for the Institute of Transport and Logistic Studies, or ITLS for short. So in what capacity do you support ITLS through the board?
Sure. I first encountered ITLS through my work on the board of iMOVE Australia. Did some work with them when I was leading the research function at Insurance Australia Group. And we brought to life the first true mobility service trial in Australia, the City trial, MADS trial, just before COVID. So working with David and the team was a real eye-opener in just the rigor and the kind of depth of that team and that institute, and their ability to build knowledge across domains, so not sort of stay in a particular mindset, but really grow and build. And then joined the board of advice, and I love it. I think the board is very active in its engagement and attendance at the meetings. There's a real diversity, and there's a constant regeneration and inclusion of, as transport evolves and changes, so does the board. And I think it's just great.
What do you think makes the board and ITLS special?
I always have a very active association with it. So there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of curiosity. There's also a lot of excellence. So the researchers routinely top the global charts in terms of research. But it's this sort of regenerative element. And I think what's at heart of it is that the Institute has been there for over 30 years. It's grown through the passion and the energy of everyone who is participatory, whether it's David, his team, the researchers. I think there's 30 odd PhD students. And that it's the people who are at the heart of it who are driving it. And then you see things like, very significant global donations that have been made that are able to then ensure that there's a translation of knowledge much more quickly into things that are really important. So some of the work that's interesting at the moment, there's work on the whole sustainability challenge. How do we transition to a low carbon mobility future? And not just in words, but also thinking about what's the risk associated with that? How do we deal with and manage those risks? And there's some great work with their chair going on there, thinking about different models of mobility and how you can personalize it, how it can work in communities and regional and remote. The chair in public transport's doing great work there. So you've got a lot that's happening. It is just a special place. And I think anyone who's involved has a great deal of affection and admiration for it.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of things. We've talked about blind spots. We've talked about collaboration between industry and research. If we had to do like a Cliff Notes, so like a summary of like the key takeaway for listeners, what do you think that would be?
Next time you hop on a bike or hop in your car or step outside your door front, think about blind spots in a really active and present way, and think about then that as a metaphor for what innovation could be in your life. It's within the hand and the grasp of each of us, and it's very much embodied in that sense that we can feel it and sense it and understand it. And if we can think about that as not just a static thing, but as a constantly changing thing, then I feel as though that opportunity for innovation, the aha, the new sight, that is more possible and more possible within a more immediate future. It doesn't have to wait for 30 years. I should actually do a quick call out for some work that I'm deeply passionate about, and that is Ian McGilchrist's work on attention and how we think about the world, how we think about curiosity, imagination, curiosity. And that is something that really underpins a lot of my thinking. And so, anyone who spends time in that world will be very happy.
How can people reach out and learn more either about you or iMOVE or your lecturing work, actually?
Sure. So iMoveAustralia.com is the place to go for. You'll see some great projects and research programs. You can always find me on LinkedIn, and the transdisciplinary school at UTS is where I'm engaged on a casual basis to do some lecturing from time to time. So that's all places to go.
Well, thanks so much for coming onto the podcast today and chatting about all these different things. I really do like that little blind spot analogy, but I like the fact you've mentioned the blind spots are dynamic. I think that's super valuable.
Yeah, it's something that's only occurred to me recently, and it is slightly blowing my mind. But anyway, thanks, Emily. Really appreciate it.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Byte Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.